and hi. Welcome back to the Here Together podcast from the Philadelphia Orchestra and Kimmel Center, Inc. This is a space where we hope you'll find a home in this art we all love. I'm your host, Khadija Mbowe, and I describe myself as a sociocultural content creator, classically trained soprano, and loving provocateur. And I'm here to facilitate some heartfelt, engaging, disruptive conversations with artists, activists, and everyone in between, meaning you. The music you just heard in the intro was Loup de Lafontaine, in English, Festival of the Wolf. Composed by our guest today, Ian Cusson, it's a half-fable, half-historical account of a community of settlers and Indigenous people tensely living in parallel ghettos until the wolf comes to town, giving them a common enemy to unite against. Ian's work frequently mines Canadian Indigenous experiences, including his own Métis background. He grew up in the tight-knit Georgian Bay Community on the northeast edge of Lake Huron in Ontario and was raised by two loving parents, both psychiatric nurses, who encouraged his interests, within reason, of course.
I was the type of kid that the piano had to be locked because I would bang on the piano all the time, and so my mom would hide the key in an apron. But I love sound, I loved exploring, I loved making things, and even to this day, I'm a big maker. I like to put together little puzzles or little miniature doll houses. I love to glue tiny things together. So for me, composing is just sort of like gluing little tiny musical elements together.
But Ian's career as a composer didn't begin in earnest until his early 30s. At age 17, he left home to continue his piano studies at the Glenn Gould School of the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. There, Ian met, befriended, and soon fell in love with a singer named Aiden. The pair married and for the next 14 or so years decided to focus on family, welcoming 4 children while Aiden pursued an interior design career and Ian worked as a church music director and community arts advocate.
There's a lot of championing artists' work. They could be singers, they could be sometimes even architects or visual artists or dancers, that sort of thing, and just really tried to support and champion the work that they were doing by bringing attention to their work. So yeah, there were a couple of really interesting things that are adjacent. I'd say they're a step beside the work that I do now, but it was always related to music, always related to an artistic practice.
That sounds like a very community-first mindset of thinking about the people around you and wanting to see them succeed in any way or wanting to just help them in any way that you can, even if it's just a matter of drawing attention to them. And I wonder, is that something that you grew up with as well back in Georgian Bay? Is Georgian Bay? Is that how I...
That's it, yeah. Georgian Bay, sort of an outlet of Lake Huron, one of the Great Lakes. In Ontario is where I grew up. And yeah, I come from a very, it's a relatively small community, tight-knit community. It's a complex community in terms of its makeup. It's got a strong Indigenous population and a mixed Indigenous population called the Métis people. So I'm part of the Georgian Bay Métis community. And then a bunch of settler communities that came in as well, especially a lot of French people in the area. And so from a young age, growing up in a family with extended cousin networks and aunts and uncles, it was always very community related. It was always very family knit. You never really could fall because there was always someone to catch you. And so that kind of community mindset was baked into me at a really young age. But interesting enough, and this is what really excites me, is I'm trying to bring something of that mindset to the work that I'm doing now, especially when I'm working with large orchestras or opera companies, is to really say people first, right? We're all artists, but we're all human beings, and our humanity is what is most important. Before we sing a note, before we play a note, before we welcome an audience, we're human beings, and we have to sort of relate to one another that way and do that well. And if we do that well, we'll make the art better, and we'll make better music. And if we do that well, we'll connect better with audiences. And if we do that well, I think we're doing pretty well.
I'll come back to, remind me to in a second, the Métis community, because there's a lot of ins and outs when it comes to, and complexities, I should say, when it comes to Indigenous communities in Canada, in North America, Turtle Island, in general, but in Canada. So I do want to talk about that. But first, I wanted to ask you, what does that putting people first model look like in a practical way, if you're meeting an orchestra or a group for the first time?
Yeah. It's about meeting them as human beings. So I would say like trying to have a relational connection, but with all the people that I'm working with is really an important part. Another image that I kind of like to, and this is not my own, by the way, but this comes from Yvette Nolan, who's an Indigenous Canadian theater director, librettist, etc. And she always talks about like many of our organizations are shaped like triangles. And an indigenized way of doing things is to really push that triangle, if you can imagine tilting it until it becomes flattened like a pancake, and then expanding its edges out so it's a circle. So taking a hierarchical structure where you have one or two people running the whole thing, and then a bunch of people underneath who sort of are the worker ants doing all of the work, and really changing that model to see it as a circular thing where, you know, there's no head to a circle, and every place on the circle is equivalent to the other places. So that to me is a way of relating in a human way to whomever is involved in a project.
I like the idea of a circle too, because and I also think that everything is so, not me having a capitalist rant, everything is so commodified that it makes even making art about a job and less about the process of it. And so, yeah, I just think that that's a really cool way of going into a space, especially because if you're a composer in residence, you have a certain hierarchy in that place.
100%.
And people are going to look at you a certain way. How do you navigate that aspect of it with this model? Like, I guess I'm asking you, like, how do you show people that, or encourage people to believe that you're genuine?
100%. Well, you know what? That is, I think at every interaction, I try to do that in some way. So, for example, and you know, we've all been in the space, right? We've all been in that room where the person walks in who does have power, who is given power, and maybe they're the first billed person in the cast, or they're the composer, or they're the conductor, and they just absorb all of that, and they wear it, and they just flaunt it, and people sort of, you know, people fall into place around them. I hate that space. I hate those kinds of spaces. And so I try to walk into a space and say, like, be as friendly, be as human, ask people human questions like, tell me about yourself. I don't need to come in and talk about myself or make every conversation be about me. Tell me about you. What do you love? What gets you excited? What do you love to play? What do you love to sing? Is there anything that I could do to facilitate your preparation of this music that I wrote? Anything that's awkward, I really want to make it as idiomatic for you to play as possible. Like if I was writing a song for you, Khadija, I'd say like, what do you hate doing? What do you never want to see in a score? Where is the sweet spot of your voice? What do you wish you could do more of? I think it's really then putting on the ears of being a good listener in those moments and saying, okay, I'm actually listening to your answers. I'm taking them in, I'm taking notes of them, and then I'm trying to produce something that can really help you fulfill what you're trying to do artistically. So this is going to sound really funny, but I sort of see myself as like, I want to come under people in the way of like, I'm here to make materials, right? Musical materials, but I want to come into that relationship by saying, how do we make you shine the best way possible? What materials could I present to you in terms of music, in terms of a song, in terms of an orchestral piece that will make you shine? Because if you're shining and you're feeling good about it and you're feeling connected to it, the audience is going to feel connected to it. They're going to see that. They're going to feel it. Even before they hear it, they'll feel it in the room. And then it becomes this kind of engaged, really cool artistic experience for every person.
Sounds like, though, in the coming under people and seeing how they can shine best, it's very much about being of service, of being able to make things, and about being of service. And sure. I know you are a religious man.
Yes.
And I am a godless heathen. So I wanted to ask you. Though, did you grow up with religion? Because I also know, and this is kind of leading into the conversation, that there's a complex relationship with religion and Indigenous communities. So,
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, okay, I'm so glad you asked this. Okay, so it's complicated. That basically is probably the best way to put it. And probably we could talk for about 5 hours about this. But in a nutshell, there's a really interesting connection in some Indigenous communities with religion, and I'm specifically saying like Christian religion, in that, and this is often related to colonialism, right? So lots of European communities came to Indigenous communities, and so you'll see this kind of, sometimes in some communities, these really interlaced Christian worldviews with Indigenous worldviews. And there's some people that have done it, I think, really, really well, where they're like, they can honor both and they can somehow pull them together really beautifully in a way that coexists and is harmonious. And there are others maybe that don't do that so well. And, you know, I would say my own relationship with all these things is complicated for sure. And sometimes I have been burned in some religious communities, and that has given me pause. But I think I try to, in healthy and good ways, pull all of these parts of my own experience together and find something very personal in that connection of these two worlds, which actually aren't that far off, I don't think. But I'm still unpacking that, so
That's
come
fair.
back to me in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's like an unfolding. You're like, well,
sure.
it's complicated.
For sure, it's
But
complicated.
Did you grow up Christian?
So I grew up in a Catholic home, so yes, Christian, but
Catholic?
a very...
Whoa,
I know.
Whoa, okay.
Oh,
Whoa.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, let me tell you. But this is the thing. So in my community, there's a really strong Roman Catholic population, and it's just like completely embedded and intertwined into that community. So even within my Métis community, there was a very, very strong Roman Catholic presence. And so I grew up in that as like a kid that went to church and that sort of thing, and then had a really strong period of rejecting that in my own life, where it was like sort of deconstructing what all of that meant, and then sort of finding a way of reconnecting the pieces of that with my Indigenous experience as well. So again, a complicated journey, and one that wasn't a straight line for sure, and continues to be a journey. And I feel like, yeah, I'm not at the end of it, but probably, hopefully before I die, I'll have some better understanding of it all, you know?
Where there's a wall, there's a way around. Where there's a wall, there's a wall, there's a way. Where there's a wall, there's a way around. There are secret passwords you can overhear. There are methods of torture for extracting clues to maps of underground passageways.
That was an excerpt from the title piece of Where There's a Wall, a song cycle Ian composed for the National Arts Centre Orchestra as part of his residency from 2017 to 2019. The work sets to music a series of poems by Japanese-Canadian poet Joy Kagawa, reflecting on her childhood spent in an internment camp during World War II. Ian says that he connected with the themes of displacement, dislocation, and fear of outsiders, elements of his own experience growing up Métis.
It's a mixed-raced Indigenous group, generally that comes out of the fur trade from the 19th century. So the fur trade's a lot of the waterways that move, but sort of between Canada and the US, but right into northern parts of Canada and western parts of Canada, were often traveled by French folks, so people from Quebec area, and they were encouraged by these companies that ran, so the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company, to marry Indigenous women in order to facilitate their kind of trade relationships. Also, people just fell in love because that's what happens. So there were things called country weddings that would happen, which were unchurch-sanctioned weddings between generally French men, sometimes Scottish men, and Indigenous women. And those unions then bred these kind of like new communities of people that didn't see themselves as a First Nations community, and they didn't see themselves as a European community. They saw themselves as something completely different. And that was the birth of the Métis people. The bulk of that happened in the province of Manitoba, but it also happened sort of in surrounding areas. And that's really where that thread of my ancestry comes from. But for sure, as a kid, growing up, my grandfather, my Métis grandfather, had a sugar bush, which is like this maple syrup farm. And he was really connected to the land. He was this person who really understood how the place where we'd lived for hundreds of years, what it meant and how to work the land and how to understand it. And so I really felt quite connected with him as a young person. And probably that was the strand that was most predominant in my mind. Having said that, I had other family members that brought all kinds of different pieces in, like Western music and Western classical music, right? So all these threads coalesced in my complicated body that is an amalgam of things. And, some people ask me sometimes, they're like, okay, well, where does your Métis part start? And where does your Métis music start? And you're like, honestly, my body is a mix of things. And just like I can't pull the threads of my own humanity and mixed raceness apart, I can't pull the pieces of my art making apart and identify, like, this is the Métis part, right? It's like my lived experience is a complexity of things, and so is my work.
I think that also speaks to, like, at least from conversations I've had with friends that are mixed race, when they're quote unquote white passing,
yeah,
what effect that has on them. Because you see yourself as one way, or maybe you were raised a certain way, but people see you a completely different way. I wonder if you can speak a bit to that.
Oh boy.
I told you we're getting deep.
Oh, these questions are amazing. And I'm so glad you're asking them, because there's very rarely a space to talk about these things, but they're important things to talk about. And I'm only answering from my own experience. Being white passing is a thing that brings with it, obviously, significant privilege and significant shame at the same time. And so there is, and that's complicated. And again, this is another piece of my life and experience that I'm working out and will be working out for a long time. Where does it bring privilege? Well, because the privileges that are afforded to cis white men are ones that are often given to me because of the way I look. And I've had conversations where people will have made assumptions about me, even knowing me for years, and I'll talk about my community, and they'll be like, "But that's not you, right?" And I'm like, "Yes, it is me." And they're like, "No, but not like that." I'm like, "What do you mean like that?" Right? Where a person's coming at you and going, "Well, I just thought you were white, but you're not Indigenous like that." And you're like, I'm sorry, who the hell are you, right? Like when that kind of thing happens and you're like, what do you even mean by this? And often those people are friends, and those people can be well-meaning people, right? And I think they're catching themselves in their own assumptions and their own stereotypes and their own racism. And that is hard. I guess some of the harder parts of the white passingness, if you will, and I'm not like saying this as a pity thing, but just where someone will say something really pejorative or really awful about Indigenous people, and they'll say it to me and they have no idea. So like I worked on this one piece where I rewrote a piece of music that was in an opera, a Canadian opera called Louis Riel. And a piece of music in the opera from 1967 had been appropriated from an Indigenous community, a non-Métis Indigenous community in Canada. And so people realized, even the heirs of the creators were like, this is a problem, we need to like fix this. And so they asked me to write a new piece of music to go in place of this aria, and I did. And that piece was presented at a large company in Canada presented the piece. And this is some dirt you're gonna get here.
Some tea.
Yeah, you ready for it? So there's a presentation of this aria, not the world premiere, but like an important presentation of it. And a man who had had several drinks came up to me after and was talking to me about how appropriation is not real, that music is just available to any composer, and they don't believe in music's being stolen from particular communities, and this is all a sham. And also the work that I did on this piece, on rewriting this piece, the original composer would be rolling in his grave, and this is a form of censorship. And after the man had said that, I kid you not, Khadija, his pants fell from his waist to his ankles. It was like...
Wait,
I was like, first of all, I was in shock that he was saying all of these things, but he was saying these things to me thinking like, oh, like I can share this with another white man who will understand me. And I'm like, you have no idea who I am or what my background is, and you feel the comfort to say this. I thought it was kind of sweet poetic justice when his pants fell to his ankles. And
when he was pantsed by the ancestors.
He was, oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, the ancestors totally pantsed him. Love that.
Oh my goodness. Okay, whew. But in all seriousness, I do appreciate you saying all of that, because that's something that, like, I understand what you mean about that shame too, because it's like how do I go about, I don't even know, correcting this? Like I don't know, like how.
For sure. Well, and here's the weird thing too about like the whole shame part, right? It's like oftentimes I will correct that person and it makes a really awkward, moment, and you do that. And there have been times where I have not corrected because I'm just like, I don't know what to say. I'm feeling like you're talking about me and you don't even know it's me, and I'm like, I don't owe you anything, and I'm just like, I need to get out of this situation. So there have been times where I don't correct. If, for example, the man I was telling you about, I just like walked away and that was done. But I think like one of the things where shame really hits me is because I feel ashamed of the fact that I get certain passes that other people, that my colleagues, my friends don't get. So perfect example, I was in the Banff Centre is a large arts organization in Canada that is like a retreat in the mountains. It's actually absolutely beautiful, and it brings together all kinds of awesome artists across Canada and even North America to the center. And I was there with a group of classical Indigenous musicians. And first of all, this is not like a huge community of people. And these were actually all composers. So there were probably about 10 of us in the room from all across Canada, finally coming together, talking about what had been hard in our experiences working with orchestras, working with opera companies, working with other organizations, expectations of us, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a great place to kind of build in a sense of unity and community, even though we had completely different lived experiences. And in one of those conversations, some of those friends had gone down to the trading post in town, and they came back up, and at the next kind of group session together where we're all sitting, hanging out and chatting, they talked about how they were followed in the store. And these people are visibly native, they're visibly brown, and they were followed in the store. And I have never, except maybe one time in my life when I was 15 and I was, potentially the bad teenage kid, but I have never in my life been followed in a store because of the way I look. And these people are well-educated people, they're lovely people, they're, all of whatever those social markers are that might make a person, quote unquote, air quotes, acceptable. But the way they appeared was a threat to that store owner. And I asked them about this, and I said, like, has that happened to you before? And they're like, this happens all the time. And in that moment, I felt I do not have that lived experience. And first of all, I'm enraged that you have that lived experience, but also like, how is it that I get the pass in that? And then the shame that brings. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. That's the messiness of that part of that like white passing experience, at least in my situation.
No, that makes sense. It's because there are definitely things that I'll tell my friends certain things because I'm very dark skinned, highly melanated. Thank you. And I will tell my friends things that I have experienced, and they just like, it doesn't compute for some of them, or they wouldn't have understood. And it's just like, I don't know how else I can communicate that. And it's not your fault also too, because no one can help the bodies that they're born into, right. But we can help the way that we interact with them and think about them. Right.
Absolutely.
And so I want to ask you now then, how do you combat that shame? Ooh. Like what do you do, or what have you practiced? What kind of practice do you have to work through that?
I make art. I make music. I think it pushes me to tell stories that don't ever get told more effectively than I even thought I could before, right? So like to push myself to be like, I'm going to rip apart every stereotype that is put in front of me is kind of like at least the thought in my heart. I know I won't do that effectively. And plus it's a community of people that are going to do those kinds of things over a long, long period of time. But it's just about saying like, okay, that's what people's expectations are. I am going to break those apart, and I'm just going to do them by making compelling art where you feel for the people you see on the stage, like the characters in the opera or whatever it might be. And you can't help but identify deeply, like on an emotional level with them, that now, even though you might have wanted to explain that person away because they were, different from your vantage point somehow, you can't ignore them, and you're like somehow emotionally locked to them. And then that somehow deconstructs one little part of your brain where it's like expectation you might have had or stereotype or whatever it might be. So I feel like I combat it by making things and just being like, no, I'm even going to push it further. I'm going to even go deeper. I'm going to tell that story or try to bring this feeling forward. I think at the end of the day, one of the things I'm really convinced of is people don't change by changing their mind. I think people's minds change when their hearts are changed. And I think that's the greatest tool. And I don't want to say tool because it's not meant to be a tool, but that's one of the greatest effects that art can have, right? When you hear something that is so compelling that it affects your emotional state, it inevitably changes your mind, is kind of the approach that I take.
Is there a piece that you've composed or presented in your recent memory that you felt like got that across? And what was it about? What was the story?
Ooh. There's a piece coming up that I'm really excited about, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But one of the things in the song cycles that I write, especially, and in the any vocal kind of work that I have, orchestral songs and that sort of thing, I always try to find the most incredible texts, and usually by people that aren't typically set to music, and usually those are female voices, and usually those are Indigenous voices. And so there are some if I just set text by Indigenous people in the world, I would never, ever, ever exhaust the incredible texts that are available, right? So like there's so much to find and to sort of create new artistic projects around. There was a piece that I wrote for the Canadian Opera Company for a winter program that they had during the pandemic, and it was a 12-minute piece for chorus, a soloist, and an orchestra, and it was called In Winter. And it was a series of texts on poems of a woman named Katharina Vermette, who is a Métis poet. She's also a novelist. She's incredible, won a ton of awards, and has this beautiful way with images. One of the images in the poem was this idea of children looking outside at the winter scene, but they're looking through this layer of plastic that's been put over the window. And I know this because when you have a drafty window, you tape this plastic membrane over the window to keep the draft out. But what does it mean to look out, and what does it mean to pick a tiny hole that becomes your vantage point out into the world? And so there was a line about children picking holes in the plastic that covers the window. And I just thought, what an incredible line that would never make its way into a work on a major stage with major orchestra and chorus. But that's exactly the kind of text that I want to position in those spaces, because it completely throws everything off kilter and it makes us think differently and feel differently. So that was a work that I loved, and I try to do that with a lot of the works. A work that's coming up, this is an incredible opportunity for me, and I pinch myself every day that I think of that I'm a part of this project. I was able to work with a librettist named Khadija Mbowe, who is an amazing Canadian librettist, playwright, film and TV writer. And this piece is called Of the Sea, and it's a story of the Middle Passage and the lives that were lost in the slave ships that came across the Atlantic, both either by choice or by force. She created a world under the water of the Atlantic Ocean that is a living, active, compelling world where these kingdoms under the water are run by these two incredible queens, Queen Jifa and Queen Serwa. And the story is of a man named Maduka who takes his daughter Binyelum off of a slave ship and into the water to save her from a life of slavery in the Americas. But he remembers his god, the god of the sun, God Chukwu, and if he can get his baby Binyelum back to the surface of the water in a couple of days, she will have life again. And so his quest is to get his baby to have the life that he could never live. And he journeys through these two kingdoms and all of these amazing people under the water that are powerful and empowered. I got invited to this project because we met in a Lib Lab, which is a librettist and composer partnership with Tapestry Opera in Toronto. And she just we wrote a little 7-minute scene, and the scene was, I thought was all we were going to be writing. And then it became pretty successful, and it got picked up, and the whole opera got commissioned. It's a 20-person orchestra with chorus and 5 soloists, and it is, I am giddy that I get to be part of that. And again, like, here's me as a Métis person. This is not my community or my culture, but I got invited across this cultural line in a way that felt generous and responsible. And like I was invited in a way that I felt like I could provide my own compositional voice into a world that wasn't my own. And it's so far probably been one of the most fulfilling projects that I've ever been a part of. And I can't wait for the world to see this opera.
Ian, is there anything else you want to tell the folks at home?
Just how much I dig you. I think you're great. No, honestly, can I just say, I just really love the humanity that you bring. Like, we talked about humanity a lot in this show, and just the human nature. And I feel like from the first time we've had a conversation, how engaged and probing and thoughtful and willing to just go there. And I think too many people shy away, and I feel like you just dig right in. So thank you for doing that. I feel like you asked me probably some of the most probing questions today that I've ever been asked. And so good on you. And thank you for making me go there, because it's important for me to do that too.
Thank you for being open, because that's what it is. It's a two-way street. It's an open heart. I could be as probing as possible, but if you're a rock, or it's like, what is it, trying to get juice out of turnip? Southern phrase. Ian, thank you so much for this amazing conversation.
Y'all, I just love Ian, and I hope you do too. Of the Sea premiered on March 25th at Tapestry Opera, which we've got linked in the description with all the other info you need to keep up with my good dude. Stay tuned after the musical outro for our in-depth lightning round bonus, where we'll talk good music, bad advice, and so much more. Meantime, enjoy a sneak peek from Of the Sea.
It's not really lightning. You can take your time to answer it. First one, who makes you laugh?
Oh, my kids.
Are you allowed to say which one?
Oh, you know what?
Can you imagine?
For sure. Well, like, Madison is the one that wants to make me laugh, and she generally succeeds in doing it by any means necessary.
How old is Madison?
Madison's a mean 13.
A mean 13. That's a good way to put it. There are parents that just got shivers up their spine.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I quake most days in fear.
Oh, no. Okay, this is a cataclysm sentence. If you had to give advice to a new batch of humans that were going to inhabit the Earth after some giant cataclysm happened and we all disappear, what would that advice be?
Love.
Can you be more specific?
I'd say love as much as possible and as completely as possible. I think proceed with love wherever you can and whenever you can. and things will go well.
This is for the optimists in the crowd. The skeptics are like, "Boo!"
Wait a minute.
Pushback. Hey. Actually. All right. What is a skill you wish you had?
Jeepers. Well, if I had a skill that I don't have that I wish I had.
Or like something cool that like you see someone do and you're like, man.
Yeah, I think something like, ventriloquism. You know, like to be able to like either throw your voice and or make it sound like a rock is talking or like a piece of wood on your hand is talking. That would be that's something I wish I could do. I've tried and it doesn't happen. I can't do it. I don't know. I don't have the technique.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone. I would never expect that answer. No offense to the ventriloquist out there. And
no, I mean, hey,
community.
Full respect to all of them, actually.
Clearly. What is a song that you wish you had written? It can be for monetary reasons or just the way it moves you.
I think this is going to be this is right in the opera world. I love From the Gutter in Peter Grimes, which is this like female quartet in a very male-centric opera. And I just think it's one of the most glorious moments of music. And I think if I could have written that, I'd be happy. I could end my career today. I'd be fully happy.
Wow. Okay, last one. What is the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Oh gosh. Okay. When I was first with my wife, like as we weren't married yet, we were told, "Oh, you're gonna hurt each other, and you should end this because you're young." And 20 years later, going strong, I feel like it wasn't good advice for us. Maybe for someone else, but not for us. They underestimated us.
Light shade, exactly. Oh my goodness. Okay, wait. So you and your wife got married.
We were 5.
I'm not doing this with you. You were the original Corey and Topanga.
I know.
All of the millennials.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I love Topanga. Actually, I had a major crush on Topanga growing up. So yeah,
that makes sense.
So I just followed in their footsteps. No, I was 20 when we got married, and I'm 41 now. So we're in our 21st year of marriage, which is crazy.
Until next month, I'm Khadija Mbowe, and this has been the Here Together podcast from the Philadelphia Orchestra and Kimmel Center, Inc.